So you've decided to learn art and create amazing drawings, paintings, and illustrations like some of the great artists of today. But you don't know where to start and what path to take. There are so many resources out there, and you might just be so overwhelmed about what you need to learn and the fact that the fundamentals are just too much to learn and it can take years to master them. But what if I told you that you only need to focus on a few things if you want to see the most amount of improvement? Simple forms. I'm sure you've heard this before, but hear me out. I ignored this simple exercise at first too, and I just thought that it's too simple to do. I thought that I know it and I understand it. But the idea here is that we need to be comfortable in drawing these simple shapes and forms in all sorts of sizes and angles. The idea here is to start helping our brain think in 3D form and start drawing these things, and you start developing that, capacity. If you struggle drawing these simple boxes and cylinders and rotating them, then how can you expect yourself to be able to draw amazing masterpieces with dynamic characters and backgrounds? So simple exercise here is to just grab things from real life, or photos. It can be simple things like a box, a cup, a mug, and things like that have simple shapes that are very close to boxes and cylinders, and you just practice drawing them. And they don't need to be perfect. The idea here is to start practicing more and more and try and draw the same things from different angles. So then the next thing, we just add perspective here. So learning perspective can be fun, but can also be very challenging. The idea here is to learn about the main 3 perspective scenario: 1, 2, and 3-point perspective. The practice here is to just take the same simple shapes that we have been drawing and practicing and just try and do them in 1-point perspective first, then try do them in 2-point perspective, and finally add the 3-point perspective. You'll notice that the more vanishing points you add, the more dynamic the painting and the more depth it will have. So start with a box. Here again, the box and the cylinders can be very helpful starting points to just understand perspective and learn perspective. Then you can go into simple items like cups and mugs, like I said, tissue boxes, other things that have similar shapes to boxes and cylinders, and try and draw these items in these 3 different perspectives. Then we move on into the more fun part, where we go into structure and construction. So now here is kind of where we take everything that we learned and add them together. The idea here is to, when we look at something, we should be able to simplify these things into the simple shapes that we've been drawing the whole time. So simplifying complex shapes into simple forms. And the challenge here and the practice here is to try and look at something and reduce it into simple shapes. And you can do many things. For example, here I have an example of a PlayStation controller where I can really simplify it into simple shapes, into boxes and cylinders, and then try and carve it into more complex things. But the beginning, it's really starting with really simple shapes of boxes and cylinders again. As we're doing these practices, we can start introducing gesture drawing. So up to here, everything that we were doing was very structured and rigid. But here's when we go the complete opposite and start practicing gesture. And gesture here, it's where we can simplify the figure in just a few lines or just a simple shapes. And usually they're very quick. They can be 1 or 2 minutes. And the idea here is to practice the flow of the figure and exaggerate it a little bit. There are lots of websites where we can just have time gesture drawing sessions, and we can practice them and use those references to start doing gestures. And you can really do lots of these and do them every day. If we do 1-minute gesture drawings, you can do 10 of them in 10 minutes. And it can be also a good starting and a warm-up exercise before we start diving into our regular drawing sessions. And then by doing all of these, we can jump into the next stage in our practice, and where we add form and structure to our gestures and even start learning portraits. So now we can combine everything we've learned into portrait and figure drawings. It's good to learn the proportions here and the main landmarks of the body and the face. So for example, for the face, we can start focusing on the Loomis method. I really like this one because it really helps understand where things go in the proportions. And you can watch this video here if you want to learn more about the Loomis method. I go through it and explain it a little bit. But the idea here is that everything that we have practiced into simplifying things and complex shapes into simple construction and can be implemented here. It helps us, learn to simplify things of the face, for example. The nose can be simplified into a little box, for example, as a starting point, and the head into a sphere first, and then adding more things to it. Same goes with the figure. The figure can be really simplified into boxes and cylinders again. And we can really have the construction or the structure of the body over the face done well with these simple shapes, then we can add more details and refine it more into what we want. And here it's always good to use a reference. Everything we do is good to use a reference. And if you find that the structure is a bit difficult or too hard to add into the gesture or to add into the portrait or to add to your figure drawing, then maybe we need to focus or practice the previous steps a little bit more. Maybe we need to practice perspective a little bit more. Maybe we need to practice, drawing cylinders in different, angles and perspectives a little bit more. And as we practice all of these together, they can build together and make the next steps even better and easier. So now with everything that we've learned so far, we can really draw anything we want. But now let's focus on coloring and the next steps after we start drawing. So the first thing that I'm going to say is forget about colors and focus on values. So this was an advice that I received and I think it was great. Don't worry about color at all. Try to paint things in just black and white, grayscale. If the values are done well, then the painting will be good. And the opposite very true. If the values are not done well, then no matter how good the colors are, the painting will not look good at all, and it will always look that something's missing and something's off. And a good practice here is just to take a reference and reduce the values to 3 or 4 values, and you can spread them all over, from light to dark, and then try painting that reference using a hard round brush using those 3 or 4 values only. And this helps to train our eyes to simplify the values and how the light and shadow really works. And you can see the theme here is always been simplify, simplify, simplify. And I really like this practice. We can go back into everything that we've learned. For example, if we've done portraits, you can do a portrait and just practice with values, and first do it with 3 values and then start adding maybe 4 values. And then you can do a portrait with proper rendering with just the values, grayscale. Always use references, because then you can really learn how light and shadow and it works and interacts with the face, for example, if you're drawing it. So color theory may sound simple, but it is hard to implement. So learn from other paintings on what colors to use. So, there are a lot of color harmonies that are easy to find and easy to reference, but when we want to actually implement it into a painting, if we don't understand what we're doing exactly, it can be very difficult. So one idea or one practice is to just steal from other paintings and practice from other paintings. So you can have your own painting done, but then when you want to add color, maybe take a reference that you like and try and understand what colors they've used, how much of it they've used, and what is the saturation of the colors that they've used, and try and implement the same concept into your own painting. And as we practice these more and more and more, we'll start to have a better understanding of color theory and how we can implement it into our own paintings. The other thing that comes with all of this is composition, and composition theory again can be complex. So instead of focusing on composition and these composition ratios, for example, focus on storytelling. I still don't understand composition theory very well. I understand some of the ratios, but I know that the more important thing here is to focus on storytelling. And one practice here that's good to do to understand composition better or get a little bit more practice with it is to do film studies. There are a lot of websites where you can just get screenshots from movies or film or TV shows or animation or anything, and then just take that and try and study it and draw it. And when you do that, you can try and figure out, why does it work? Is it because the values are good, or is it because there's contrast between sizes? Is it where the placement is? And by looking at these things and practicing them more, you'll get a better understanding of composition naturally and you can implement it into your own painting. And now, all of this being said, remember that it will only work if we're having fun doing it. So just don't make art about improving alone. Enjoy the process, and hopefully by this time next year, you have made so much progress and you're creating amazing illustrations.